welcome to Dive Deep. Today we're going to continue the discussion on our series Love God and Love People. And our goal in this podcast is to deepen your relationship with God and equip you to live out your faith in ways that change the community around you. Joining me today is Pastor Branden. Welcome, Pastor Branden.
Thank you, Caleb. Good to be with you.
So glad to have you. It was fun to hear your approach on yesterday's topic, being able to close that out. Kind of the pitch hitter, really, is what that was.
I think it's a joy.
Yeah. So it was exciting. I mean, as we looked at it, obviously, the book that at least Arlie's kind of take on it was the examples that are there. And then you were able to put really just some meat or some flesh around that skeleton, kind of give us your perspective of it. And of course, you emphasize Jesus is our role model. You know, he's the one that we go to first, the one that we look at. I'm curious though, because and you didn't really get time or opportunity to go into detail. Do you think that we have an incomplete view of Jesus if we only study his actions in the Gospels? Is there more to learn about Jesus in the Old Testament or in the rest of the New Testament that we need to consider?
Yeah, the first question is, I don't like using the word incomplete when it comes to our knowledge of Jesus. I believe we have what we need in the life of Jesus, where we can model an example from the examples we have. I think when we infer things about Jesus, that's when we can get in trouble and different ideas form. So if we just base what we know of Jesus on the Gospels, I think we have enough to base our leadership and our personal responsibility out of. So that's your first question. The second, is there more to learn about Jesus in the Old Testament? I think when you read prophecy, I think there's absolutely more of a wholeness about somebody when you can come at different angles. Just because he didn't exist yet in the Old Testament in the physical, the physical was only a part of who Jesus was. Mm-hmm. There's also a spiritual element to Jesus, and that's where you get the Old Testament when they prophesy about this Jesus. It gets more of a spiritual aspect of him, and then the future Jesus as we see the resurrection and all that. And then if we read Revelation, we know who that Jesus is going to be, the great judge, and how he will return. So you're right. I don't think the Gospels give you a complete knowledge of who Jesus is. I think it's enough to base our lifestyle after, for sure, in the leadership of Jesus. But yeah, I think you go outside of the Gospels to get more of a full effect of who Jesus was.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear. I think you're right that what we learn about Jesus is enough to model a life after in the Gospels. And then what's outside of that really just enriches our understanding and further develops our faith in deeper ways and deeper levels. And you talked yesterday just a little bit about kind of the leader's role, both in loving to be first and loving to be a leader, and how that's not necessarily maybe a good attribute. But you also talked in just for a quick second about the leaders need to care for themselves as well. And we saw that demonstrated with Jesus. He went off alone in solitary ways. Talk a little bit about kind of that difference between the American culture of to-do and pacing yourself for a life of service.
So I think there's two different paces that we can set for ourselves. One of those is our physical calendar, where our physical space, where we need to be, when we need to be there. And I think if we're not careful, we can overwhelm our mind with our physical schedule. And so when we're talking about that personal management and the responsibility, where healthy leaders can only lead healthy people. Mm-hmm. When you get unhealthy, that's when you start leading unhealthy people, or the healthy leaders under you will move on. And I think it starts personally. You need to lead yourself well. You need to make sure you have the mental capacity to lead well. And so you need to schedule in some mental awareness. Don't always fill up your schedule. You might have time in your physical schedule for something, but your mental capacity doesn't catch up with that. And so I think when people get burnt out or overwhelm themselves, it's not necessarily their physical schedule that does that. I think it's more of the mental capacity that sometimes can get neglected because of all these responsibilities that we put on ourselves.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just because physically you can do it, does that mean mentally that you're capable or that you even should do it?
Yeah, and that's why you need to know yourself. You need to have good self-awareness. You need to have somebody who can tell you about yourself, so then you can get the wholeness of who you are.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I mean, I hear a lot of just talking about balance, and it feels like that's a theme that's kind of woven into every aspect of this human experience is, balance and how do we strike that. And as we looked at, some of the relationships that you were talking about yesterday with who do we influence, who's influencing us, it felt like balance was kind of woven in that as well. And I wanted to ask you, how do we balance having relationships that we invest in, but that don't necessarily build us up?
Yeah, I like that question because I think you need to have both in your life. I think you need to have moments where you are being built up in yourself, and you need to have people around you that can support you positively. And there was a part, and actually somebody came up to me after service and said, where is the witness if we only surround ourselves with positive relationships? And there was a good clarity moment in that, and I spoke a little bit about it in my sermon when I said that doesn't mean you kick everybody out who is negatively affecting you, because we need to have a positive experience with people who maybe aren't the most positive with us so that we can build them up. So the influence, the 5 most influential people that I talked about, those are the people who need to be positive with you. Those need to be the people you spend the most time with are the ones that need to have a positive example for you. The negative ones you can spend time with to try to build them up, but they shouldn't be in your top 5, or more than likely they are going to affect you. So you need to invest in both, but your top investments need to be those 5 influential people.
Yeah, and as you talk about those 5 influential, something I caught yesterday as you went through that list was you've given them permission to speak into your life. How important is it that you have permission from someone else to speak into their life, especially as we're talking about these individuals that maybe we're investing in?
Right. I mean, you don't want the negative influences, you don't want to allow them to speak to you, or there will probably be a negative effect in your life. And so I think it's very important, like you said, you give permission to. Mm-hmm. And that's why the self-awareness is important, because you need to know who to give permission to, what to give permission to for your influences. And so there needs to be those people, and it's funny because the negative people in your life, a lot of times they want to give that advice to you,
right,
that influence to you, without you asking permission for it. And that's when you need to say, okay, let's chill out a little bit. Like I have somebody else who is speaking into me. I don't need this from you necessarily. If it comes to a point, maybe I would want that. But yeah, I think it's important giving permission to the right people.
Right. And for those negative individuals, if they haven't given you permission to speak into their life, that's going to create a really challenging scenario. So what do you do when you see their life heading in a very destructive direction, but they haven't given you that permission to say, hey, this is going to be bad for you? You talked about that example, and they, it sounded like, had given you permission, but they didn't heed it. They didn't listen to it.
Correct.
But what if that negative person in your life hasn't even given you permission to speak into their life, but they're going to do some really bad damage if something doesn't change? Do you risk the relationship and kind of try to share the truth with them, try to steer them a different direction, or do you have to just let them go?
Well, I think the initial conversation is very important, where if I asked to speak into somebody's life where I might see something negative happening and they said, I don't want to hear it from you, I don't think you should force your advice on them. I think the question should be, is there somebody in your life who you would feel comfortable speaking into your life? You know, if it's not me, I really think you should be, talking and asking advice from somebody. Would you like a recommendation? I wouldn't try to force it on them. I would certainly offer it, but once they deny the offer, I think the next question needs to be, would there be somebody who you'd listen to or go to?
And there's a really wise strategy there where before you're confronting them with the situation they're in and where it's heading, you are asking them permission. Hey, do you want to hear this from me or not?
Yeah.
You're giving them the option to say yes or no, which, that gets a lot of credibility because that puts the power back in their hand to say, yeah, it's a conversation I want to have, or no, I don't.
Right. And then when something maybe negative or bad happens to that person, I can say in myself, man, I did all I can to help them. I even offered to go outside of myself to help them. And although sad, I can at least feel good about, man, I tried.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's difficult sometimes as believers because we do approach the world with a different perspective. And so we make choices or, have conversations or follow kind of a code of life that outsiders may question or not fully understand. And we've been talking about kind of our witness throughout this series of how we love people. It feels like sometimes as we make these decisions, it can form a reputation in the minds of others that's not positive because they don't understand what we're doing. So I guess the question is, how hard do we strive for that reputation? Obviously, we don't compromise our beliefs or our morals. What can we do for those people that don't understand the choices we're making to help them understand that we're making a choice here to follow God, and this is why?
I think if they see consistency in our life, they will eventually want that. I think it's a natural progression. I think when it comes to us, we live in a certain way. We treat each other as believers in a certain way, a loving way. And I think more people are going to be turned off by God than they will be looking at our actions and how we treat each other. Because if you look at the Acts 2:42 to 47 example, what is happening there? Is there any witnessing going on? Is there any outreach?
Right.
That's all in reach.
This is lifestyle.
This is how the church takes care of each other. And then those from the outside are seeing this, and thousands were added to their number daily because they saw it. And so I think there is a natural relationship that happens when somebody who is unhealthy sees healthy and they see consistency in the health, they're going to be drawn to it automatically.
So I guess the answer to the question I'm hearing is don't worry so much about the reputation, but stay consistent, and eventually they'll see that consistency, and that will speak.
I think for the most part,
yeah,
absolutely. But be in a position where they can see your healthy lifestyle. That's also important too. You need to continue to be in their lives, even though you might think you're not affecting them. Eventually, when trials come our way and we're still consistent in who we are in our Christianity, they have to see that, or at least ask us about it.
Okay, very good. Do you want to leave a final thought with those who are listening today?
Yeah, if you listened to the sermon, I said something about how I test myself and my knowledge. There are multiple ways to put myself in uncomfortable situations and how my faith is. But I gave a book example, The Evolution of God, and how the author wants to humanize God. And if you're not careful when you're reading those, you might be sucked into that type of thinking that will draw you away from God. I do it because I know I'm strong in my faith, and I like to test myself. But I don't like to go into a test without being motivated that, hey, I'm going to come through this because I've done my study. So if you're not strong in your faith and you're a new believer, I probably wouldn't read The Evolution of God.
There you go.
Because you're not far up the road, and you're a little bit stronger in your faith to have that type of example.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for that word of advice and caution to those of us listening. And thanks for connecting with us today on CWC Dive Deep. If you value the time you've spent here today, join us on our mission to invest in others by rating, reviewing, and sharing this podcast wherever you might be listening from. And join us next week as we begin our Advent sermon series. And if you missed past episodes, check those out at cwc.life. Have a great week.